I'm a police officer and you're a bad guy, and I'm going to do everything I can to gather evidence against you to put you in prison. And if I don't and you get away with it, that's the rub of the green, right? But it works both ways. So if I catch you and put you in prison, get over it. The impact of becoming a victim and not having the right security as a consequence, it is very traumatic and can be very expensive. And it's a terrible experience.
I think if I understand correctly from our previous discussions, you do this thing where you kind of notionally kind of target some of your clients or prospective clients.
We do. I've targeted and took on some of the most difficult criminals where we've tried and failed and tried and failed. You just have to come at it at a different angle and eventually you'll succeed. And I genuinely believe that's the same in business. If reincarnation exists, I'll come back as me. I've had a brilliant time. I've had lots of fun, worked with some amazing people.
Right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jeff Hill, welcoming him to our podcast. This episode from SRLV's Not Just a Number is about Jeff, and he's a retired police officer. He's a security expert, director and co-founder of Harrier Global. He's decades of experience fighting sophisticated, organised criminals. And he's using these special skills and experience to help protect, well, mostly people's homes and assets, mainly entrepreneurs and rich people. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Kieron. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Now, I guess, can we start at the beginning? Can we talk a little bit about your work at the police? Because you've had decades at the police. Can you tell us maybe a few career highlights?
Well, I was one of those very fortunate people, which, I think is quite uncommon. I knew I wanted to join the police when I was really young. Yeah. So from the age of about 14, I thought this is
I suppose it's one of those jobs that exists in children's books.
I think it might.
Yeah.
Be. So it's either a policeman or a postman.
So
really,
tax advisor,
or
it doesn't really feature in.
I've got to be honest, that wasn't on my radar at the time. I might have had a completely different career. Who knows? But no, I knew that I wanted to be in the police, and I never contemplated actually not getting in. There wasn't a plan B. I did O-levels as they were and A-levels, and I decided not to go to university and go straight for a career in the police. I applied, I was accepted. I joined Sussex Police, and the police proved to be everything that I ever thought it was going to be. I mean, I wanted a job that was going to be outside predominantly, which is bizarre because at the back end of my career I was predominantly inside. One that changed every day, one that had a career potential and opportunities. And I guess it sounds quite cheesy, but actually I wanted to do something that made me feel good about myself, something that was worthwhile and benefited others.
Making a difference.
Yeah, exactly that. And so I joined the police. I went to Brighton. I remember very, very vividly that when I started there, I lived in lodgings, and so the policing was all that there was in my life. I used to go to work, love every minute of learning to be a police officer and doing police work. I'd come home. I'd just look forward to going back into work again. I'd go to bed, get up and do it again. And then obviously when I was off, I'd go and return, usually to go see my parents and my friends at the time. But it was a great period. And I was very, very fortunate in that very early on in my uniform career, I was for a short period of time paired up with a guy called Fraser Torbett. I'm going to give him a shout out in case he ever watches tax podcasts, which he might not do.
Well, I'll send him a link.
Great. Fraser Torbett was and remains the best police officer I've ever worked with. He was just brilliant. And he used to run the area car. I was on an attachment to the area car for a week of nights, and we'd drive around, and he knew every criminal in Brighton. He'd see them. He knew if they were wanted. He knew what they were, what their particular crime types or preference were. We used to stop and search people, and inevitably we'd end up arresting people going equipped for theft or having broken into cars and things like that. And I thought, I want to be this guy. He's just exceptional at what he does. And so I kind of tried to model myself on him, and I took all the bits that I saw that he did that made him successful, and became what it's probably still termed now. I became a bit of a thief taker. So I'd go out and you'd obviously respond to the radio.
So what were these characteristics that he had that inspired you?
Well, he used to recognise people. he'd know who the criminals were. He would, even if he didn't know the criminals were, he was the kind of guy who was bothered. So instead of sitting in the car and seeing somebody walk down the street at 3:00 in the morning and think he's probably okay, he'd stop the car, he'd get out and have a conversation with them, and would, as a consequence of that, make a decision and a judgment as to whether they were just going about their lawful business, in which case it was a very positive interaction, or whether they're likely to be out committing crime, in which case they might be subject of a search and everything else. He was great at talking to people. You know, I could see how he would engage and ask questions in a way which wasn't confrontational, but nevertheless gave him a good insight and an understanding as to what somebody might be up to. And he'd kind of just see things slightly differently to other cops. He would see someone and think, that doesn't look right, and would respond to it.
Okay.
And I did the same. And as a result of that, I ended up with a number of self-generated arrests and crime detections as a consequence. So that brought me to the attention of the CID very early.
So the CID is
the Criminal Investigation Department. Yeah. So the guys and girls who are detectives who literally day by day are just out there investigating crime rather than responding to calls for service. So I went into the CID the week my probation finished on what was an aid. You'd go in for 3 months. You would have a little look at the work. They would have a little look at you. Everyone would decide whether it was an actual fit or not. And when there were opportunities and there were vacancies, then potentially you'd be considered for one of those vacancies. So I went in for 3 months, worked hard, and it just so happened at the end of the 3 months, there was a vacancy which had become apparent. So it was done hugely differently in those days than it is now. There were no boards. There was no, equal opportunities. It really was round pegs and round holes. And I found out subsequently that the DCI, the Detective Chief Inspector, who's in charge of the CID, went into the office and basically said to the detectives who were there, "Look, you've had 3 aids. Who do you want?" And they decided. So I ended up becoming a detective at the age of 21 as a consequence of a good bit of feedback by my peers. So I ended up in the CID as a fairly young man in Brighton, and professionally, it was everything I could have asked for. It was fantastic. I was investigating all manner of serious crime. I was working with some really exceptionally talented officers from whom I was learning a huge amount. I was dealing with some very serious criminals, and I really, really enjoyed it. But the fly in the ointment was that the policy at the time in Sussex Police was that when you'd finished your probation, so every officer who joined at the time did a 2-year probationary period. Once that was concluded successfully, if you were single, you went to Gatwick Airport. And you were part of the policing response at Gatwick. So it was literally policed, with the exception of 1 or 2, very few number of married officers, predominantly by single people, because it was a bit of a bum posting. Nobody wanted to go because it was dull. All you'd have is people would lose their bags, or other
so
shoplifting from sunglasses.
Not quite the the CID experience that you were used to.
Exactly that. But how it affected me was that I didn't go. But everyone who went, they stayed in a place called Slafford Manor, which is a big section house. So it was party central. Work was dull, social was great. But everyone partied together up there. I'm 25 miles away in Brighton. My peers are up in Slafford Manor. So I was finding that when it came to weekends where I'd be off and I was looking to socialise and go out, all of my peers were the guys who'd done the circuit from Gatwick, married their air hostess wife, had come back, had children, and had got back into the CID at Brighton. So all of my peers at Brighton were young married guys with families and responsibilities who they might have wanted to go out, but they definitely weren't going out. So I found myself a bit of a loose end. So my parents at that time had moved back to where I'd done my schooling. The reason I joined Sussex was for a whole host of reasons I won't bore you with. They'd been in Sussex at the time. So I found myself on my days off going back to Cambridgeshire, where I'm from. And eventually I just thought, well, this is pointless. I'm working down in Brighton. I'm travelling every time at the weekends or during the week whenever I'm off back to Cambridgeshire. I might as well transfer. So I did that. I transferred it to Cambridgeshire Police. They paid no attention or interest into my history and my experience, strapping in a uniform, because that was the policy.
Okay.
So I ended up back into uniform, patrolling Peterborough, which was fine. And I just reverted back to being the very proactive street cop that I had been. And again, got back into the CID very, very quickly. So from there, I was a DC at Peterborough. I got promoted to sergeant. And if I'm honest, I got when I got promoted, I'd taken my exams. You have to take 2 exams in the police, sergeant's exam and inspector's exam, to be eligible for promotion. I'd taken those exams, and I had them almost in my back pocket. And I allowed the aspirations that others had for my career to run away with me. You know, I had people say, "Oh, you're a bright lad, Jeff, and you know, you're a talented police officer. You need to get promoted." And I thought, yeah, I do. That's what I need to do. I need to get promoted. So I applied for promotion as a sergeant and was successful, and I got promoted. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm at risk here if I'm not careful of not doing all the things I joined the police to do, have all the fun that is there to be had. So at that point, put the brakes on. And despite lots of advice and a little bit of pressure, I stayed as a sergeant, a detective sergeant, for the bulk of that period, for 10 years. Doing all the stuff that I wanted to do. So I went back as a DS in a traditional CID. I then worked on kind of crime squads, proactive teams of drug squads. I run the full surveillance team for a number of years.
So what kind of criminals were you targeting? Drug dealers?
Yeah, that kind of thing. But at that point, in the main, targeting local criminals.
Okay.
People that weren't necessarily committing crime regionally or nationally, albeit we did kind of get ourselves involved in the investigation of some localised criminals who were engaged at crime at that level. And but that was probably the only time at that stage that I was engaged in that. Went on the full surveillance team, absolutely loved that. That was like going out to play with your mates rather than going to work every day. We were doing all manner of conventional technical surveillance against some of the most serious people that lived.
So these were sophisticated, organised criminals.
Yeah, so people you don't catch because no one turns around and says, "Oh, I want to make a statement to say that person sold me a load of drugs." You know, that doesn't happen. You've got to catch these people proactively. So, you're engaged in gathering evidence against people who don't want to be caught in a very proactive sense. So. That was, I'd run the full surveillance team at that time. So we used to be used to gather evidence against a lot of those more difficult criminals. And then my surveillance team sat within an organisational structure, the top of which was a very, very experienced and well-respected senior detective who called me into his office one day and literally said, "It's time." And I said, "Well, time for what?" And he said, "It's time for you to get yourself promoted." And I was like, "I'm not sure I want to get promoted. I'm enjoying what I'm doing." And he had a long conversation with me about, look, every so often you need to actually sometimes, in your view, take a step back to take 2 steps forward. And we need you to be going to do a particular job. You need now to be doing it. And because I very much respected his judgment, and ultimately he was going to tell me to do it anyway, I decided to accept the
it wasn't a question. It was
absolutely. So I went as a temporary DI to Peterborough. And if I'm honest, that was when, because I was given a portfolio, an intelligence portfolio.
So DI, detective
inspector, yeah. So I was kind of the third rung in, a middle junior manager role. And I had a portfolio, which was the intelligence portfolio for the whole of the Peterborough area. And so I used to see all of the information, intelligence about criminal activity, and I was given pretty much a free rein. And so I started to take on some arguably criminals that I probably shouldn't have done because they were at a much higher level, and ended up,
So we're talking serious organised crime.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely, yeah, okay. And ended up with some real success in that. and thoroughly enjoyed doing it. Use some very sensitive tactics against a lot of really serious criminals, and it's a lot of fun doing it.
And I suppose maybe we'll come on to this a bit later, but it helped you understand how some of these more sophisticated criminals think.
Yeah, I think your journey through policing is just that. It's an experiential journey. Every stage you're learning more, not just about the organisation, but about the job at hand, and also the people that you're up against. So yes, learnt a lot. And, I continued learning till the day I left, really, in one sense or another. From there, I ended up coming back to police headquarters, and I set up the covert operations unit for the force, which was a combined unit of the Force Intelligence Bureau, the surveillance team, and we created an undercover unit because I had some success using undercover tactics against some of the criminals that I'd previously been investigating. I then got promoted to Detective Chief Inspector. I had a divisional responsibility. I was the crime manager for the greater Cambridge area. So I was in Cambridge City and all of the rural area. And if I'm honest, that's probably one of the most difficult periods professionally and domestically. I was married. I had 3 young children, all under 5. It was a very, very high pressure job. Lots of expectation in terms of hitting at the time the performance numbers that were required. At the time, policing was all lined up into performance groups, and there was a lot of pressure to hit those performance targets. And it's quite a,
if I understand correctly, quite a hard environment. It's not put their arm around you and
yeah.
So how was it dealing with that kind of stress and pressure in quite a tough environment?
It was. I wouldn't say necessarily that I coped with myself in glory doing it, both domestically or professionally. You're trying to spin so many plates. I mean, I had to go. There was my route from where I lived into Cambridge was subject of ongoing roadworks, so it meant that to get into Cambridge, To get into Cambridge, you either got into Cambridge at 8 o'clock in the morning, or you got in at 10:30, because the traffic was so bad. And there wasn't any public transport of note at the time. Something that avoided that. So I used to have to leave for work, 6:30. And then I'd get home in the evening about 6:30 at night. So it was a routine 12-hour day. And then I'd have 3 kids who I hadn't seen, who wanted to see me, and it was bath time and cry time. So that was difficult, and let's be honest about it. When you're working in a job which is demanding lots of hours, you've left your wife on her own all day with the children, your relationship is a bit difficult as well. And that was a difficult time for both of us. So domestically, it was hard because, I was I wouldn't say I brought work home, but, you've got that constant
such a high pressure job that it's
in the back of your mind.
You have to be a bit strange if you can completely compartmentalize it.
Yeah, definitely. And there is there's no silver bullet in terms of alleviating that pressure or stress. And then at work, because as I say, I was running the CID for this division, it's a subdivision, it's a division. I was putting staff under a lot of pressure. And if I'm honest, the public didn't get a great service. I'm not just saying from us, but from policing in general at the time, because we were focused exclusively on hitting performance targets that we've been set by the Home Office. You were constantly beat up as a force if you weren't achieving at a certain level. Inevitably, someone was always going to be bottom of whatever group they'd put you in. So it was hard. And, I was constantly, speaking to my staff and, just trying to squeeze a little bit more out of them. I didn't particularly like doing that, but that was what was necessary. And it was just a difficult time, I think, for policing. So I guess my exit from that was another promotion. So I got promoted to be a superintendent. And I was appointed a detective superintendent. I was one of 5 across the force. And I ended up with the portfolio, because I was late in, that nobody else really wanted, which was the volume crime portfolio, which basically consisted of every bit of project work that sat in the crime world that nobody else wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it was all the bits that didn't naturally connect to anybody. So it was a mismatch of a lot. I worked for a really, really good chief constable at the time, and we had a lot of direct engagement with our chief. And I was involved in many, many projects. I mean, things in so many different pies. And she rang me up one day and said, I picked up a national portfolio for Citizen Focus, which was the police service's efforts to return policing back to something which resembled working for the public rather than just delivering numbers.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's great. Well done, you. Probably not in those terms. And she said, but I'd like you to be my staff officer to my national piece of work. So I was going to retain my existing portfolio and take on this extra responsibility. And very naively, I said to her on the telephone, I said, Chief, I'm incredibly flattered that you thought of me to lead this bit of national work on your behalf. But if I'm honest, I really don't think it's for me. And she said, and I really don't think you're listening. So inevitably, I was going to be doing it. So I ended up picking up this piece of work, which I didn't really want. It was a lot of politics, working on behalf of the chief with other chief officers, the Home Office, very political, very difficult, like cutting through treacle. It's just, I found it really, really difficult. And I'm the kind of person who, as an end game in mind, and you achieve success because you get there. But with this, you were never going to kind of get there. And we had many, many disagreements with the Home Office over certain things, their expectations on what it looked like. And they wanted a policing pledge, and we said no, because you're just reverting back to measurables yet again. And but then there was a little bit of leverage put on the police service to accept the policing pledge. So we ended up having to rewrite it in a way that was less damaging for, if you like, the citizen focus agenda. But so that was a piece of work that I did alongside my day job. And I was a superintendent for 10 years. So as a DS, as a superintendent, they were my two times at longest in rank. And because I'd worked hard on it, I was always that person that thought, I might not want to do it, but I'm just going to get on with it, suck it up and just do my best. And the chief was really good because I think, I wasn't perfect at it, but she recognised that and said to me, after a period of time, right, okay, we're going to have a move around. What job do you want? So I said, I want the head of the major crime unit for Cambridgeshire. And she duly gave that to me. So I ended up taking on responsibility then for major crime for Cambridgeshire, which at the time was all homicide investigations plus all serious and organised crime investigations with the requisite staffing and budget for that. Really enjoyed that. Had some good people, again, talented people that worked for me, and we had some real success. And then because of the budgetary pressures on policing, police forces were encouraged to collaborate with other forces for different thematic areas. So there's a concept in policing about what they call protective services. So these are policing services that need to be delivered but don't need a CAP badge. It doesn't need to be delivered by a local police service. And Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire collaborated on all protective services, of which major crime was considered to be one. So I then became the heir apparent and helped design and build the major crime unit for the three counties, which was a major crime unit, not including serious and organised crime, just solely major crime, which in the main is homicide, but singularly serious and serious crime also sat there as well. So I had 180 detectives and staff working on crimes of that nature across the three counties. I was qualified in the lead senior investigative officer for all matters of homicide, kidnapping, extortion, counterterrorism. So I did that in the three-force arrangement for a period. I then got promoted once more to detective chief superintendent. So I, in addition to the major crime unit, picked up scientific services and special branch. And then my final promotion was to assistant chief constable, where I initially had responsibility for the whole of the Joint Protective Service Command and two regional units. And it was a very, very large portfolio. I had it for about 18 months, and then the chief officers of the region started to become uncomfortable about the size of the portfolio, not because of the pressure or the responsibility, purely because of the budget, because my budget was approaching almost the size of Bedfordshire Police's budget. So they decided that they were going to split the role in two, have a pure Joint Protective Service, ACC, Assistant Chief Constable, and create a second role for the regional units. And I worked for an amazing guy called John Boucher, who's now the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And I'd worked for John already for a number of years. And John came to me and said, okay, which job do you want? So I took the regional units because that's where a modicum of fun was still to be had. So I ended up with the Counterterrorism Intelligence Unit, co-located with Security Service MI5, and the Regional Organised Crime Unit, co-located with the National Crime Agency. And I ended up with responsibility for counterterrorism, strategic responsibility for counterterrorism and organised crime for the east of the country. I also supported John on a national piece of work around undercover policing, and worked to ensure that the delivery of those tactics across the country was at the right standard, dare I say the new standard, because we were about to go into a public inquiry where that was going to be examined, how policing had used undercover tactics for many, many years. And that's kind of where I retired. So that was 30 years. I was going to say that.
You've seen a lot. You've got the scars to show.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I have. Do you know, I'll be really honest with you. There are some police officers who will say, I gave my life to policing. You know, my family life, I'm on my third marriage and my kids hate me. You know, I didn't do that. I was at every one of my children's performances at school, every sports day. I made sure I was there for that. I can't say that I put my life on the line. I did. Yeah, okay, in policing you get into some tricky situations, but I wouldn't be the person to turn around and say, you know, I nearly lost my life here. I didn't do that. I did have, on occasion, some personal threats, particularly with one investigation that I ran that manifested themselves into, alarms, panic alarms at home.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, how did that influence your decisions on your own home security?
Well,
panic alarms, obviously.
Yeah, well, I think at that time, because there was a very specific and real threat against me, because of some work I'd done against a particular group of criminals, that that was necessary. And if I'm honest, I was really as much. I wasn't. Of course, I was concerned. I wasn't worried about it. I wasn't frightened about it. I was more put out by it because, I was of that group of individuals. I joined policing in the 80s, and there are rules. Yeah. There are rules, and the rules are simple. Okay, I'm a police officer, and you're a bad guy, and I'm going to do everything I can to gather evidence against you to put you in prison.
Yeah,
and if I don't, and you get away with it, that's the rubber to green, right? But it works both ways. So if I catch you and put you in prison, get over it, because that's the game. There's no outside of work. We clock off. That's it. Game over. But, unfortunately, there was this particular group who didn't quite see it that way. For most others, I've got to say, some very, very significant, serious criminals that I'd worked against over the years, I'll have a drink with them in the pub. And bizarrely,
really?
Yeah,
okay.
and wow. I have. There's somebody, I'm not going to obviously name them, but somebody, high-level criminal, who doesn't live far from where I live, knows who I am, knows that. I kind of grew up in a very similar environment, played football against them, and all that. So they very much know me. That individual I've put in prison a number of times, and a number of times I haven't. I walk into a pub, he's there, Jeff, let me get you a beer. Come over, have a beer. Proper professional respect for each other. Now, when I say I respect him, I respect he's good at what he does. I mean, to say that he gets any less attention. He knows how it works. So that was, if I'm honest, that was a difficult period in terms of, scars. There were occasions when, I was busy. I beat myself up even now when I look back sometimes at the quality time I had with my children where my mind might have been on other things. That wasn't great. And
so just struggling to stay present.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, playing football and I'm kicking the ball and I'm thinking, God, how long is this going on for? And I love football, but it's just because something else was on my mind. And, I look back at that and thought, that wasn't great. And there were occasions as well where I was maybe a little bit more, I was more short-tempered than I am now. Our fuse was a bit shorter. So that wasn't great. And that was, again, a consequence of work. But, I'm not going to turn around and say that I'm damaged by policing. I had the best time ever. It's a cliche, but if reincarnation exists, I'll come back as me. I've had a brilliant time. I had lots of fun, worked with some amazing people, some really talented people, and come out of it the other side and gone into business. So, what's not to like, really?
You spend a little bit of time in the Middle East. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I had a number of trips with work, some with investigations, some for some strategic work. I went out to in the Caribbean. I went out to Canada. I was in the Middle East doing some work for or working with UK-friendly governments out there in relation to the undercover world.
Yeah,
we were out there assisting them to increase their capability, improve their capability, teaching them how we use the tactic effectively and safely, and how it can be quite dynamic. So assisting them to build a program of work to enable them to use the tactic effectively in their country. So I was fortunate. I did a bit of travelling. Not as much as some, but I can't complain. There was a period of time where I did used to complain. I was about 15 years in, and I'd say, the furthest I've ever been is Spalding, in Lincolnshire. That can't be right. It's been all over the world. So, I did a little bit of travelling, but not huge. And whenever I went travelling, there was a necessity for it. So,
I guess this all now brings us on to the quite interesting stuff you're doing now. So all this experience with the police, I think you kind of get the criminal mind, and hopefully that helps you guide your clients how to potentially defend themselves against burglaries, losing their physical assets, that kind of thing.
Exactly right. So the Middle East that you mentioned earlier becomes hugely relevant because my business partner and we were out there together. We were talking about what next. I was coming to the end of my 30-year service. You don't have to leave at 30 years, but your pension's optimised, and we're all kind of chipped to go at 30 years. And my business partner stayed on in a support role in the service, in the undercover space. And we were talking about maybe we could do something together. And whilst I think, it's not lost on me that police officers, and certainly, having been in a very strategic role, I have a number of skills which are transferable into the private sector. I kind of wanted to do something that I was interested in. I was fortunate enough not to need to chase the money. Mm-hmm. So that was quite liberating. So it meant that, I didn't necessarily have to work, and I chose to do what I now do. And we said, well, look, why don't we use the skills, the operational skills that we've gained over a combined 65 years of experience in tackling sophisticated career and organised criminals. And when you start breaking that down, we really do then position ourselves as providing services predominantly to the wealthy, high and ultra high net worth people. And the reason we do that, and that's
so who are your clients? So you've got high net worth people. They live in the UK. I think. Am I right in saying maybe you've got some clients on the Wentworth estate, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we worked with a couple of ultra high net worths, and then some other high net worth individuals in that Surrey super prime area, the private estates with St George's Hill, and we continue to work with clientele who've made their money through their intellect, their business dealings, and to some extent through inheritance. But I think over the last 2 years, we've started to do a lot more work with high profile people who've made their money through their talent.
Entertainers and sports people.
Exactly that,
okay.
Yeah. So we decided that we were going to use our skills to protect people against the activities of sophisticated criminality. Now, the fact is, serious criminals don't target Middle England. They target the wealthy. So that's always where our business was going to be anchored. And what we do, which I guess makes us quite different is that we don't sell a product. So we sit very much in that consultancy space. So we're not trying to...
well, you're not flogging a video, a CCTV camera.
Yeah, or security personnel or any other mitigation measure. What I'm not trying to do when we talk to clients is to fit my solution into your security problem and sometimes wedge it in.
Yeah.
Because there is no mitigation measure that is the panacea. It can all be overcome. It can all fail. So instead, we sit very much in the consultancy space. And what we do is we work with clients and we don't look at them through the lens of a solution. We look at them through the lens of a criminal. So what we do is go through the processes that criminals do in terms of their research, their reconnaissance, their execution of their crime, so that we understand where clients' vulnerabilities are. Because it's only through understanding where those gaps are that you'll properly keep somebody safe, because criminals see those. Clients don't always see that, because what they do, they go to the marketplace, they know what they know, and they inevitably will cherry pick one, maybe two, maybe sometimes even three measures that they believe or perceive will keep them safe. And they're not wrong when they do that, but the only way to ensure someone's safety is to make sure that the security is generally or genuinely layered, blended, stitched together in a way where there are no vulnerabilities. And that's through the understanding of how criminals operate, how they make decisions, how they target, and the kind of measures that will genuinely deter them. Because we're not in the cops anymore. We're not going to catch these people. We're just literally pushing them down the road.
You've got to make it really difficult for them.
We do. And it really is about a series of aggravation factors which will cause them to stop, have to consider how they're going to overcome things, and it just becomes too difficult. And the fact of the matter is now that crime in the UK at that level is globalized. So, back in the mid-80s, when I was working in Brighton, if you'd have had a very, very wealthy home that was subject of a burglary or a robbery, inevitably the people who were responsible for that might come out of South London or somewhere like that. It was a relatively tight geographic area. Well, now that's not the case at all. Now the wealthy are targeted not just by people right across the UK, but right across the globe. We have experience in the UK of people coming to the very affluent super prime areas from South America. And there's a number of examples of that where they come over here to commit serious acquisitive crime, whether it be burglary or robbery. We've got the same with Eastern Europe, Albania, Romania, places like that. They export their criminals over here because we are, as a country, perceived to be wealthy. A lot of wealthy people live here. There's a lot of wealthy properties, and people come here for relative rich pickings. If you consider the fact that it probably is cheaper for somebody to fly from Eastern Europe to the UK and back than it is for me to have got my train into London today, and then for them to stay maybe in a Premier Inn or Travelodge somewhere, hire a cheap car, you've then got access to the UK. No one really knows who you are, what you're doing here, and you only need to be successful on one job, and manage to secure access to a very expensive series of watches or handbags or whatever it may be that you specialise in, and you've covered your expenses and some. So that's why we are attractive as a country, and that's why wealthy people need to approach their security in a different way. I think
if I understand correctly from our previous discussions, you do this thing where you kind of notionally kind of target some of your clients or prospective clients.
We do.
Can you tell me a bit more about that, or do you not want to go into too much detail?
There's a lot of USP associated with what we do, but we go through the process that criminals do. So we will
because I think this links into you really understand the criminal mind, so you will do some of the strategies that an organised criminal mind might.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's criminals, if they've decided that they're interested in a particular individual, will build a profile of those individuals. It might not be a large file, but they want to understand everything about that individual so that they can see where their opportunities are. Because at this stage, they've not decided necessarily how they're going to do something. So they want to know, who they are, maybe what their routine is. And particularly for people who are in sport and entertainment, it is the routine nature of their professional lives, which puts an added layer of vulnerability to them. But
it's online presence, social media, it's additional risks there.
Absolutely. So we do what they do, that we will do a lot of open source work, try and find out, as much as we can about their lifestyles, where they live. We find out where they live. Invariably, we can get plans and photographs of their house. So we want to know what exists in open source. Now, there are some very, very powerful deep mining tools that we also have access to, but that's a paid-for service, so we tend to offer that to clients, and that will find everything that exists about you. And it's almost done in an investigative way. It may well be that if your telephone number has been subject of a data breach, then from your telephone number, there's links to other things, and from those, the spidergram goes out. So, that is one way in which you can find out so much about people. We do that at the surface level to start with. And that gives us a bit of a clear understanding then in terms of some of those early advantages that clients unintentionally are giving to criminals. And we work with them to reduce those. But coming back to your point about predictability, those people who are wealthy, but particularly those who are high profile, who are in entertainment, whether that be music or sport or something like that, they exist and they make money because other people enjoy what they do.
Yeah.
And to do that, they have to promote what they do, and they have to be available, and the public have to know when
they have to be on social media. Our firm, probably half of our client base is in some way connected to sport or show business.
Yeah.
The website's got the list of their tour dates.
Exactly that.
Everyone knows exactly where they'll be, what country they'll be in on a particular date, because the tour's on the website.
Exactly that. And they're going to be on stage,
and it needs to be, or else no one's going to turn up to the show, and that's how they make money.
Exactly. So whether you're a musician on tour, a presenter who's going live, a footballer playing up and down the country, your routines are predictable.
Yeah.
So when you combine three things together, that's where you end up in that perfect cohort of people who are of interest to criminals. So one is obviously high net worth. Now, I can probably Google, certainly with Premier League footballers, I can tell you what their salary is likely to be.
Yeah.
I can extrapolate from that what their brand deals are likely to be, and also what their bonus setup will be. So I've got a rough idea of what they're earning. They kind of help me understand that better, because they love to be on social media with the Patek Philippe's and the Lambos and
flash
stuff
car,
like that. and that's okay. And one of the things that we say to people all the time is live your lives. Enjoy your life. Don't not have those things because you've worked hard for them. But we just need to understand that they might create a risk if you live your life in a certain way, and we mitigate that for them. But certainly the high net worth is the first variable. The second is the predictability of their movements. And, we do some work with people in professional football. And it's not just the fact that, when they play at home and when you play away, and that when they play away, they stop overnight. It's not that. It's the fact that that they will train most days in the week. You will know where they train. They'll get there between 8:30 and 9 in the morning. They leave between 1:32 in the afternoon. That
you might know what their car looks like because it's on Instagram.
I'll come on to that shortly, but definitely. But international break, they'll play for their country, or they'll be on a domestic holiday.
Yeah.
Pre-season, domestic holiday, pre-season training, pre-season tour, which the club tell everyone around, and pre-season training starts again. So if I'm looking to burgle their house, I know when they're likely not to be in.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to rob them, use violence or threaten violence to them or one of their family members, I know when they're likely to be in. So that predictability is a real advantage to me as a criminal. And sometimes we talk about Instagram and social media. The two factors that leave people vulnerable is not actually what you think. Number one is the fact that whilst the opposition have a good idea when they're not at home, they confirm it. And it's actually not usually the talent, it's their partner. So often we see, footballers, might be on holiday. It's a fair guess that they are on holiday, but their wives or girlfriends will post pictures of them, on the yacht in Capri. That just confirms that they're not at home. And the second thing is their cars. And the reason their cars make them vulnerable is if I can't find out where they live just through good research in open source, then if I know what car they've got, most training grounds come to a T-junction at some point where all the fans stand and have shirts signed. And it's as simple as waiting for players to leave. The grey Lambo has gone left and people will loosely follow somebody home. Now, I don't want for one moment to alarm professional footballers or anybody who've got their predictable routine. But, if you've got a lift-off point and you've got a vehicle, then you're in a great position. If you can't find something out through passive research, you can be far more proactive and potentially find them out. And no one's going to want to drive home conducting anti or counter surveillance every day. It's just not normal. It's not natural. So, keep your vehicles off of Instagram. But the final element, wealth, predictability, is security. And what happens is that high-profile wealthy people routinely are very poor at security. And the reason that is because they either try and work it out for themselves or they take advice from the wrong people. So they'll speak to the player care at the club who will have some people who can fit CCTV or put somebody sat in a car on their drive. That's not a security infrastructure. That they will speak to their mate who knows somebody who works a door at some nightclub, who knows a bit about it. It's that basic sometimes. And I guess the thing that I would say in terms of professional sports athletes and people in music and who are victims of crime, not one of them had no security. They've all got security. The security they've got is inadequate or it's set up in the wrong way, or it's not properly integrated with other security measures. And so, it's really, really important that if you're looking to build a security infrastructure, that you understand that it has to be layered because you're working on the basis that the measure before has failed. It has to be properly integrated. But above all else, you have to understand the capabilities of the opponent, of the adversary. Until you know that, you can't properly protect yourself. So without being overly dramatic, it's like somebody holding up a dustbin lid to somebody presenting a firearm. It's never going to protect them. And it's the same with people just making the assumption that I've got CCTV and I've got a house alarm, that's enough. And we see this a lot. We talk to people and say, look, would you like to have a conversation? And they'll say, I've got security. And we'll say, security is a massive piece, and you might have some security. It's whether or not you've got the right security to protect yourself against the quality of the criminal who may look to target you. And that's kind of where we work in that space is helping people to understand what else extra they need and how the existing security that they have is properly set up and integrated with everything else.
And I suppose probably the sad thing is you probably end up speaking to a lot of people who have been victims of burglaries and potentially violent robberies where the families have been threatened or harmed.
We do. And whilst we would like in almost every occasion to speak to people ahead of that event or so that we can prevent it happening, we do inevitably get introduced to clients as a consequence of them becoming victims. And it's interesting when you think this through. So, any security infrastructure, some of it is zero or low cost. Some of it is expensive, and is a high ticket item. We say to people, if you're in your forever home, do it well and do it once. But the fact of the matter is that you can't afford just to cherry pick, as we said. And, in terms of your approach, you need to look at it as, I don't like to use the term, but it's almost like a wealth tax. The cost of your security is a wealth tax. If you're wealthy... That's
a swear word in this room.
I know that, there's a difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance, right? That's where you...
well, we can't even say that anymore. It's tax planning.
Tax planning, of course. Structuring.
But it is interesting because I always talk to people about, how to protect their assets, and I always talk about offshore trust structures or something like this if they're an international family and that's appropriate for, or making gifts to family. But actually, a lot of people don't think about how are you physically going to keep this asset safe.
Well, you're absolutely in the same space, and I say to people all the time, paying us for our professional advice is no different from paying your accountant who's going to set up structures that are tax efficient for you to retain as much of your wealth as possible. And what we do is exactly the same. We're introducing structures, lifestyle adjustments, whatever else is necessary for people to retain their wealth, but in a slightly different set of circumstances, not have this horrendous experience which comes with becoming a victim of crime. Of course, if you come home to find your house has been burgled, or you're notified and you get home and your house is ransacked, that is awful. And for a lot of people, and particularly, this is not being misogynistic, it's just the way it is, the female parties feel it quite deeply. It's an emotional event. It's an intrusion. You should, an Englishman's home is his castle, and, you don't expect anybody to come in there without permission, and it's people see it as a violation. So for a lot of individuals who have become victims, they don't feel secure in that property anymore. God forbid you're a victim of a robbery. Not only will you no longer feel safe in the property, but you will never forget the experience, particularly if it involves your children and things of that nature. And there are some horrendous experiences which people we know have had. But the consequence of that is if somebody within the household, your wife says, I just don't feel safe anymore, we've got to move. And you will know this. If I move from a £4 million house to another £4 million house, just somewhere else in a different house, the cost of that is huge.
The stamp duty land tax, that's giving me a heart attack right now.
Hundreds of thousands, you've got agency fees. Before you know it, you're probably in for £250,000 to stand still, to move from one property to another, because you haven't looked at your security. And it's just very easy to avoid. And I use this term all the time. It's a bit like, looking at your security and doing it properly and doing it well is a bit like buying a new car and somebody says, oh, you want the body kit on it and you want this sound system inside. Do you want a spare wheel? And you go, I don't think I need one of those. And then when you have a puncture on the M1, you think, why didn't I have the spare wheel? In the broad scheme of things, for the people we work with, it's small beer. But the impact of becoming a victim and not having the right security as a consequence, it is very traumatic and can be very expensive. And it's a terrible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we kind of wrap up, are there any things you'd like to share about your own kind of entrepreneurial journey? You've become a person who's founded a business with, you've got a business partner as well, but after a career, how has that been?
Like being in the police until the day I retired, it's a learning experience and continues to be. I think some of the things that I've learnt, when I was in the police, I didn't expect this in business, but I kind of had to remind myself. When I was in the police, I could get my executive assistant to pick the phone up and ring somebody, and they'd be in my office within an hour because I was the assistant chief constable, and that's how it worked.
Yeah.
And my EA
because there was a status associated with that. Okay.
Structure, and that's how it works. So I could command people's attention and their presence.
Yeah.
My EA would mop up behind me and sort everything out. And then you go into business, and particularly, if you don't start with all of that around you, you're doing it yourself. And that was like a bit of a wake-up call, really. I think the things which...
so what you're, I don't know, dealing with a printer, sending out the invoices?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm doing all of that. Not like yourself, obviously. You've got all that support around you. But so that was an obvious wake-up call. I think the lessons that I learned, firstly, is when you work within an organisation, all of the the legal requirements, the structure, everything that you have is already done for you. When you come into business, you start thinking about, professional indemnity insurance. You talk about tax advisors and all of these things you've not had to consider.
You've got to do your annual accounts. You've got to register for VAT.
Absolutely.
I could go on for days on this.
I'm sure
company secretarial stuff, company's house.
Look, you know it all back to front, and you're very much worth your fee, whatever that is, because you take all those problems away. But the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of people go into business and don't necessarily make adequate financial provision to set themselves up properly around that, because there's a cost.
Yeah.
So that was something which kind of I'd anticipated to some extent, but
when it smacked you in the face, then you really realise.
And particularly when you start, you're not earning anything and you're just throwing money at things. It's not always particularly palatable. But those are the things I guess I learned very early on. We took a decision at the very early stages of our business that we didn't want the traffic which came through Google searches. We thought that because we'd been quite successful early on through introductions, that we were going to just be personal, professional recommendations only. It made us a little bit exclusive, and that worked to some extent, and it was fine, and actually was a solid business. And I think the problem is that then you get to a point where you then start to have aspirations and think, well, actually, I want it to be bigger and better and more successful. And when you do that, then obviously you need a lot more wrapped around you. These days, it's an absolute fact that any business that is successful has to have a presence on, LinkedIn and social media.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That's a drain, particularly if you're going to do that yourself, and you're not skilled at it either. So, there's a bit of learning there. But I think ultimately the one thing which I've learnt is that networking is everything. And I suppose I always, to some extent, knew the basic principles because I'd worked in an environment with criminals where we'd use undercover tactics.
Yeah.
You build a relationship with somebody, and they like you, they'll give you what you want. They'll help you out. And the same applies in business. If you're building a relationship with people that isn't just based around that transaction, but is something which is far deeper, you've got a relationship outside of your business.
Yeah.
You get them as an individual, they get you, and you start to establish a friendship with people.
Friendship, trust, yeah.
Absolutely. Then those people will put themselves out for you. If they don't know you and you just provide a service, I mean, as unique as our service is, nevertheless, I'm busy. I've got stuff to do. I mean, as much as I, appreciate what you do, this is a greater priority for me. But when you build that relationship with people, they're prepared to put you higher up on that priority list. So I've learned very much that networking is key. And that wasn't something in policing, which I had to do.
You didn't. Yeah, you do. It's not a feature of it at all.
No, I mean, you've got a network because it happens by consequence, but you're not actively going out and manipulating your network. I mean, what we do, we work with high and ultra high net worth people. That's clear. You can't advertise. Well, it's very difficult to advertise what we do anyway, because we're not selling CCTV cameras, so you can't have a big picture of a camera. How do you get across in imagery what we do? It's really difficult. And if you're then going to put it down on paper, it's very, I wouldn't say it's complex, but it
gets a bit wordy when you're trying to sell consultancy services.
It doesn't lend itself to advertising in magazines or periodicals and things like that. It really is that personal introduction. Somebody saying, there's somebody I've met who I think you'd like to meet because they provide this amazing service. Once we're in front of clients, it's fine. But, in the main, most clients will want to work with us. But it's getting those introductions. So networking, I've learned, is absolutely key, particularly with the people who are servicing other needs of those high and ultra high net worth clients. People who have clients that require services. And, we hope, and well, certainly at the moment, it seems to be the case that, those service providers get what we do and are prepared to introduce us. And, that's great for business.
But you must be doing a good job because they wouldn't refer to you again because their reputation's on the line if they're referring
100%.
something to you,
and
one of their best clients, and you mess it up. There's a lot of trust there.
And that's, again, you talk about learning, that's something very early on in that process that you have to get your head around, which is that whilst you might be offering a different service under a different banner, the fact is you're representing the person who's introduced you. You just drop the ball once and their reputation's on the line. They've introduced the wrong person. And I've had that myself in the business that we do with a very high profile client. There was somebody that we worked with many, many times. And we introduced them to the client to do a very discreet piece of work, and they dropped the ball. It was a conspiracy of circumstances, but the client very much blamed them for it. That looked bad on us, and we had to do a lot of reparation with the client as a consequence. So we understand that you're representing somebody else's business as much as you are your own.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very wise. Any final tips you want to leave us with?
Well, I think
it could be home security, life. It could be, I don't know. You could look down the camera and say something to those burglars.
I don't think that will change what they do, but I think the two things I would say. One, I guess, from a professional point of view, is if you're wealthy, have your security reviewed.
Yeah.
Particularly if you've moved house. A lot of people tend to accept that the security that comes with a house is adequate for their needs because the person who had the house previously, whether it's a developer or a previous occupier, was content with it.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it good, doesn't make it adequate for your needs. So, review your security and do not, arguably, unless you're an expert in the field, try and fix it for yourself because you will probably not get it right. That's the first thing I would say. Professionally, what I would say is, and I guess this was something which I learned in policing and I've brought into business, is be resilient, be dogged and determined, do not give up. If you believe in what you're doing, then back yourself and keep going because, I say to my adult children who are in, in employment but work, for companies where they need to go out and sell their services.
Yeah.
And I say to them, look, beyond every peak, there's a trough, and beyond every trough, there's a peak. This is how it works in business. So don't become too despondent when things are at a low, and don't get overexcited when things are at a high. Just keep going and back yourself. And particularly if things haven't broken for you yet, doesn't mean to say that what you're doing is wrong. Your service is poor, your product is poor. If you believe in it, just keep going. And you will sooner or later achieve your objective. And that has always worked for me in policing. I've targeted and took on some of the most difficult criminals where we've tried and failed and tried and failed. And you have to come at it at a different angle and eventually you'll succeed. And I genuinely believe that's the same in business. And our business, is a strong business. It's not necessarily where I want it to be just at the moment. But, we've come from nothing to where we are, and that's just through hard work and determination. So I would say, don't give up.
Brilliant. Very wise words. Thank you so much for, let's see if we can get a handshake in.
Absolute
Great to
pleasure.
have you.
Lovely to see you
on the show. Thank you.